The barracks hummed with the low-frequency vibration of a warship preparing for conflict. The air, thick with the metallic tang of recycled oxygen, carried an undercurrent of nervous energy as rookie soldiers exchanged cautious glances. They were young, eager, and untested, their scales, fur, and hides polished with the earnestness of fresh recruits. Yet their confidence masked an undeniable truth. They had never faced the chaos of war. Kael'Zor entered the room, his gait deliberate, his presence commanding. The Stellan veteran towered over them, his angular frame adorned with faded battle armor that bore the scars of campaigns long past. His left mandible twitched faintly, a habitual tick born of old injuries, and his eyes, a molten gold, swept over the rookies like a predator assessing its prey. The murmuring ceased. The eldest of the rookies, Nakan, stepped forward. His cerulean skin shimmered under the stark lighting, and his voice carried a blend of bravado and unease. "Commander Kael'Zor, we've heard the stories. They say you fought alongside the humans of Earth, the so-called Deathworlders. Is it true?" Kael'Zor didn't immediately reply. Instead, he removed his helmet with a faint hiss of pressurized air, revealing a face weathered by time and conflict. His gaze lingered on Nakan before shifting to the others, a motley group from different corners of the galaxy. Each bore the hopeful naivety of soldiers who believed war could be learned from stories. "It is true," Kael'Zor said at last, his voice a low rumble that filled the room. "I fought alongside them, and I learned more about war, survival, and courage from the humans than I ever thought possible." Lothric, a lanky Avran with feathered appendages, tilted his head. "But humans are fragile, aren't they? Their biology is inefficient, short-lived, prone to disease. How could they teach you anything of value?" Kael'Zor's mandibles flared slightly, a Stellan smile, though it carried no warmth. "Fragile, you say? Then perhaps you've never heard of Earth, the death world that birthed them, a place where the air, the land, and the sea all conspire to kill, where predators stalk the weak, and even the smallest creatures carry venom potent enough to fell beings twice their size. Humans are fragile only if you judge them by their physiology. But in spirit," he paused, his eyes narrowing, "in spirit, they are unbreakable." Zural, a stout Torquine with a broad chest plated in natural armor, scoffed. "Stories. Every species has their myths. What makes humans different?" Kael'Zor stepped closer to the circle of rookies, his armor clinking faintly with the movement. "What makes them different?" He tilted his head, as if genuinely pondering the question. "Humor for one, bravery for another, and their unyielding bond of brotherhood. They do not fight for glory or conquest alone. They fight for each other, for survival. I have seen them endure the unendurable, because they refuse to let their comrades fall." The skepticism in the room was palpable. Zural's mandibles clicked as he prepared to respond, but Kael'Zor raised a hand, silencing him. "You doubt me because you have not seen what I have seen. Allow me to share what I know. Then, perhaps, you will understand." The rookies exchanged glances. Lothric's feathers rippled, a sign of intrigue. Nakan crossed his arms, his expression a blend of skepticism and curiosity. Zural leaned back, still unconvinced but willing to listen. Kael'Zor began pacing, his heavy boots echoing against the metallic floor. "The first time I met humans, I underestimated them. I was assigned to a joint task force during the Great Zalarian conflict. The Zalarians were relentless, machines driven by cold logic, incapable of fear or mercy. We were losing. Entire planets fell to their advance, and our coalition was desperate. That's when the humans arrived." He stopped, turning to face them. "I remember thinking they looked ordinary, soft, smaller than I expected. Their leader, a man named Sergeant Cole Mason, was a peculiar blend of seriousness and irreverence. He had a way of speaking that made you want to laugh and punch him at the same time. I didn't trust him, not at first." The room was silent now, the rookies leaning forward unconsciously. Even Zural's skepticism seemed to waver. Kael'Zor's voice softened, carrying a weight that demanded attention. It wasn't until we were deployed on Thalzer for that I understood what they were capable of. That jungle was a death trap, teeming with predators and hostile terrain. The Zalarians were entrenched, their stronghold protected by automated defenses and drone patrols. Our mission was to destroy their superweapon, a device capable of wiping out entire fleets. Failure was not an option. He paused, his mandibles twitching as he recalled the memory. The humans led the charge. They moved with precision and purpose, their every step a calculated risk. And when the Zalarians ambushed us, they didn't falter. Mason was the first to fire. He stood his ground, barking orders, rallying us even as the enemy closed in. I saw him pull a wounded comrade to safety while returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. That day, I learned that humans are anything but fragile. Lothic's feathers ruffled, his voice hesitant. But why? What drives them to fight like that? Kael'Zor's gaze shifted to him, his tone solemn. Because to them, every life matters. They do not leave their own behind, no matter the cost. It is not about pride or duty, it is about love. The love they share for their brothers and sisters in arms. I have seen them sacrifice everything for one another, and it is that bond that makes them stronger than any species I've ever encountered. The rookies were silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Nakan's earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by a contemplative frown. Zural's mandibles clicked softly, but he didn't speak. Kael'Zor's voice softened as he delivered his final words. You wanted to know what makes humans different. It is not their weapons or their tactics. It is their spirit, their resilience, their humor, even in the face of death. If you are ever fortunate enough to fight alongside them, remember this. They will give everything to protect you. The question is, will you do the same for them? With that, he turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. Tomorrow, I will tell you about the siege of Astonished. Perhaps then you'll understand just how far their ingenuity can go. The door hissed shut behind him, leaving the rookies in stunned silence. For the first time, they felt the weight of the galaxy's most unexpected warriors pressing upon them, and they weren't sure if they were ready to bear it. The dense canopy of Thalzer Four's jungle stretched endlessly above, its tangled vines and jagged leaves forming a labyrinth that seemed alive. The air was thick, humid, and suffocating, carrying the faint, acrid stench of decay. Every step sank boots into muck, and every sound, whether the rustle of unseen predators or the distant hum of enemy drones, set nerves on edge. Kael'Zor moved silently among the foliage, his weapon gripped tightly, his senses heightened. He was not alone. Stay close and stay quiet, came the low, firm voice of Sergeant Cole Mason, the human squad leader. His tone was calm, but carried the weight of command, effortlessly cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. Kael'Zor had fought under many leaders, but Mason was different, gritty, unconventional, and maddeningly casual. Yet somehow, the man inspired unflinching loyalty from those who followed him. The mission was simple in theory. Infiltrate the Zalarian stronghold deep within the jungle, plant charges on their superweapon, and retreat before detonation. In practice, it was a death sentence. The Zalarians, relentless synthetic constructs, outnumbered them 5-1. Their stronghold was guarded by automated defenses and drone swarms programmed to hunt organics. Success seemed impossible, but Mason had assured them, impossible's just another way of saying, worth a shot. Kael'Zor had initially dismissed Mason's words as reckless bravado, yet as they crept closer to the enemy perimeter, the humans' confidence seemed contagious. The squad moved with precision, a mix of humans and aliens working together in uneasy harmony. The humans led the way, their movements swift and deliberate despite the unfamiliar terrain. Mason was at the front, his dark eyes scanning every shadow, every glimmer of movement. The squad froze as Mason raised a clenched fist. Ahead, faint beams of red light crisscrossed the path, signaling a grid of motion sensors. Mason knelt, beckoning the others closer. "We're at the edge of their defenses," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Kale, you've got the longest reach. Can you take out the sensor on the far left without tripping the others?" Kale-Zor nodded, his mandibles twitching with anticipation. He raised his rifle, its barrel gleaming faintly in the dim light. A single, precise shot, and the sensor went dark. Mason gave a quick nod of approval, his expression unreadable but his posture relaxed, as though this were routine. Moments later, they were past the grid, weaving through the jungle as the stronghold loomed closer. It was an imposing structure of blackened metal and angular lines, pulsing faintly with the cold, blue light of Zalarian energy. The air around it seemed colder, unnatural. Kale-Zor felt the weight of the mission settle heavily on his shoulders. The squad reached the first checkpoint, a narrow trench leading to a side entrance. Mason gestured for them to halt, then motioned to Corporal Jennings, a wiry human with a perpetual grin. "Jennings, your turn to play hero. Get those charges set." Jennings grinned wider. "You mean again?" Without waiting for a reply, he slipped into the trench, his movements impossibly fluid. The rest of the squad held their positions, weapons ready, breaths held. Kale-Zor couldn't help but marvel at the human's ability to joke in the face of death. Minutes stretched into eternity before Jennings returned, his grin intact. "Charges set. Let's hope they like fireworks." Mason smirked. "They'll love it. Let's move." The squad pressed on, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the stronghold. The air grew colder, the hum of enemy drones louder. Then, without warning, the night erupted in chaos. A spotlight flared to life, bathing the jungle in blinding white. A mechanical voice boomed, its tone devoid of emotion. "Intruders detected. Engage and eliminate." The first wave of drones descended, sleek and deadly, their weapons spewing streams of plasma. Mason barked orders, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "Scatter and hold positions. Focus fire on the flyers." Kale-Zor found cover behind a fallen tree, his rifle snapping off shots that tore through the drone's metallic carapaces. The air was filled with the acrid smell of burning metal and the cries of battle. Nearby, Mason was a blur of motion, his rifle blazing as he directed the squad with unwavering precision. A drone swooped low, its plasma cannon charging for a deadly shot. Kale-Zor's mandibles flared in alarm, but before he could react, Mason was there. He lunged forward, tackling Kale-Zor out of the line of fire and firing point-blank into the drone's core. It exploded in a shower of sparks, and Mason grinned as he helped Kale-Zor to his feet. "You're welcome. Now keep your head down." Kale-Zor stared at him, stunned. In Stellan culture, such an act would have been considered reckless, a leader risking themselves for a subordinate. Yet Mason didn't hesitate, didn't even seem to consider the danger. The battle raged on, but the squad pushed forward, their resilience unshaken. They reached the superweapon, a massive, cylindrical device humming with ominous energy. Mason wasted no time, directing Jennings and Kale-Zor to plant the final charges while the others provided cover. As Kale-Zor secured the last charge, a plasma bolt scorched the ground inches from his feet. He spun to see a Zalarian war machine advancing, its multi-barreled cannon aimed directly at Mason. Time seemed to slow as Kale-Zor raised his rifle, knowing he wouldn't make the shot in time. Mason didn't flinch. He stood his ground, firing relentlessly even as the war machine bore down on him. "Kale!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get everyone clear. Now!" Kale-Zor hesitated, torn between loyalty and survival. Mason's gaze met his, firm and unyielding. "That's an order, soldier." With a heavy heart, Kale-Zor obeyed, rallying the squad and retreating into the jungle. The last thing he saw was Mason, standing tall against the war machine, a defiant grin on his face. The charges detonated moments later, a thunderous explosion that lit up the night and shook the ground. The stronghold collapsed in on itself, and the superweapon was obliterated. Kael'Zor and the remaining squad regrouped at the extraction point, battered but alive. They waited, scanning the jungle for any sign of Mason. None came. As the extraction shuttle arrived, Kael'Zor stared back at the smoldering ruins of the stronghold. Mason's sacrifice weighed heavily on him. But so did the human's words. Every life matters. For the first time, Kael'Zor understood the depth of those words. Humans didn't fight for glory or survival alone. They fought for each other, with a courage that defied logic and a bond that transcended species. As the shuttle lifted off, Kael'Zor made a silent vow to honor Mason's memory. He would carry the lessons of Earth's warriors with him, and he would never forget the man who had shown him the true meaning of bravery and brotherhood. The gray wasteland of Astonished stretched endlessly beneath a sulfuric sky, its jagged crags and desolate plains offering little cover and less hope. The moon's atmosphere was too thin to breathe, forcing the survivors to rely on sputtering oxygen units. Kael'Zor crouched behind a makeshift barricade of shattered machinery, his claws tightening around the grip of his rifle. Behind him, the remnants of the squad huddled together, their exhaustion etched into their faces. The siege had begun 2 days ago. The Zalarians had arrived in force, descending like locusts from their orbiting dreadnoughts. What should have been a routine supply run had turned into a desperate fight for survival. Their comms were down, reinforcements were out of reach, and their ammunition dwindled with every passing hour. Despite it all, Corporal Ethan Donald sat with his back against the barricade, chewing absent-mindedly on a piece of dried rations. His helmet rested beside him, revealing a face streaked with grime and an irreverent grin that seemed permanently etched into his features. "You know," Donald said, his voice carrying a conversational tone that felt absurdly out of place, "if I ever survive this, I'm gonna write a book. How to die horribly on a moon no one's heard of. Think it'll sell." Kael'Zor's mandibles twitched, a subtle stellan expression of irritation. "Is this truly the time for humor, Donalds?" "Always the time for humor," Donalds replied, tossing the ration wrapper over his shoulder. "Keeps the brain sharp. Besides, you should try laughing sometime, Kael. It might keep your head from exploding under all that doom and gloom." Before Kael'Zor could respond, a burst of plasma fire streaked overhead, sizzling against the barricade. The Zalarians were advancing again, their skeletal constructs shimmering with cold blue light as they emerged from the dust. "Positions!" Donalds barked, his tone flipping instantly to one of command. He grabbed his rifle and leaned around the barricade, firing a series of precise shots that dropped 2 drones in quick succession. "And Kael, you might want to save your lecturing for after we don't die." The squad opened fire, their weapons lighting up the dim landscape. Kael'Zor focused his shots on the lead Zalarian, aiming for the narrow slit where its optical sensors gleamed. It crumpled under the assault, but another stepped forward to take its place. "Damn things just keep coming," muttered Jenkins, a wiry human whose left arm was crudely bandaged after a near miss with a plasma blade. Donalds grinned even as he fired. "That's the problem with homicidal robots. No union breaks." Kael'Zor resisted the urge to reprimand him again. The human's irreverence baffled him, but he couldn't deny its effect on the squad. The tension lifted, even if only slightly, as laughter rippled through their ranks. The skirmish ended with the Zalarians falling back, regrouping just beyond the squad's line of sight. Kael'Zor scanned the horizon, his sharp vision picking out the glint of their reassembling forces. "They'll be back soon and in greater numbers." "Yeah, thanks for the pep talk," Donald said, slapping a fresh charge into his rifle. Then he stood and clapped his hands together, the grin returning to his face. "All right, people, new plan. We're not going to sit here and wait for those tin cans to blast us into space dust. We're going to turn this rock into a death trap. How exactly do you plan to do that with half a clip of ammo and no heavy artillery?" Kael'Zor asked, his skepticism clear. Donalds raised a finger. "First rule of survival: improvise. Second rule: when you're outnumbered and outgunned, you make the other guy wish they stayed home. Jenkins, start stripping those busted drones for power cores. Lauren, get me a layout of this area. Every nook, cranny, and potential bottleneck. Kale, you're with me. Time for some creativity. Kale Zor followed Donald as the human began scouring the wreckage for anything usable. They worked quickly, salvaging parts from broken machinery and abandoned cargo. Donald hummed a tune as he rigged together explosives, using scavenged fuel cells, wires, and duct tape. Kale Zor watched him work, equal parts impressed and confused. Do humans always approach imminent death with such levity? Pretty much, Donald said without looking up. See, the thing about us is, we've spent a lot of time dealing with impossible situations. Hurricanes, earthquakes, wars, alien invasions, you name it, we've survived it. And if you can't fight your way out, you laugh your way through. Kale Zor considered this, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. I cannot decide if your kind is ingenious or insane. Little bit of both, Donald replied with a wink. By the time the Zolarians launched their next assault, the squad was ready. Donald had turned the narrow canyon leading to their position into a gauntlet of improvised traps. Power cores rigged as mines detonated as the first wave advanced, tearing through their ranks with devastating force. Hidden wires tripped their leg servos, sending them tumbling into pre-prepared kill zones. The squad opened fire, taking advantage of the chaos. Kale Zor fought with renewed vigor, his rifle felling enemy after enemy as Donald shouted encouragement from behind him. Look at that, Donald's called, laughing as a trap sent a drone spiraling into a crevasse. Murphy's Law Special, patent pending. Despite the odds, the Zolarians began to falter. Their advance slowed, their formation scattered, but the squad was far from safe. A towering war construct emerged from the dust, its cannons glowing with charged energy. It unleashed a volley of plasma, obliterating part of the barricade and sending debris flying. Kale Zor pushed himself to his feet, his ears ringing. He spotted Donald a few meters away, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. The human was grinning through the pain, struggling to his feet. Kale, Donald shouted, tossing him a detonator. Time to blow the last surprise. Kale Zor looked toward the war construct and saw the final trap, a cluster of fuel cells buried beneath loose rock. He didn't hesitate. With a single press of the detonator, the ground erupted in a blinding explosion. The war construct staggered, its metal frame buckling before it collapsed in a heap of smoldering wreckage. The battlefield fell silent. The remaining Zolarians retreated, their ranks broken. For the first time in days, the squad allowed themselves to breathe. Donald sank to the ground, leaning back against the battered barricade. And that, folks, he said, wincing as he touched the cut on his forehead, is how you survive a hopeless situation. Everyone still breathing. Kale Zor nodded, his mandibles twitching in what he realized was the closest thing to a smile. You are insufferable, Donalds, but effective. I'll take that as a compliment, Donald said, closing his eyes. Now, if anyone needs me, I'll be dreaming of steak and cold beer. Kale Zor looked out at the smoldering battlefield, a newfound respect settling over him. The humans had once again defied the odds, not with superior firepower, but with ingenuity, humor, and an unshakable will to survive. As he turned back to the squad, Kale Zor realized that he had underestimated the humans once again. They were not just survivors. They were the kind of warriors who could laugh in the face of annihilation and find a way to turn the tide. And in that laughter, Kale Zor found a strength he had never known. The mess hall aboard the ISS Lioness was unusually quiet, a stark contrast to the usual din of clattering trays and animated conversations. Kale Zor sat at the far end of the long table, his frame hunched as he stared at the steaming cup in his hands. The faint hum of the ship's engines resonated through the walls, a constant reminder of the vastness of space beyond. Across from him sat Corporal Ethan Donalds, sporting a freshly healed scar on his temple, a souvenir from Astonished. He was sipping on a bulb of synthetic coffee, his grin more subdued than usual but no less present. You're brooding again, Donald's remarked, breaking the silence. Kael'Zor's mandibles clicked softly, a sound of contemplation. I am reflecting, he corrected. It is the habit among my kind to revisit moments of significance, to understand them fully. Donald's leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. Significant moments like not getting obliterated by homicidal robots? Yeah, I guess that qualifies. Kael'Zor tilted his head, his glowing amber eyes meeting Donald's. It is more than survival. In both the jungle of Thalzer, for in the desolation of Astonished, I witnessed something profound. Humanity's strength is not merely physical or strategic. It is difficult to put into words. Try me, Donald said, setting his coffee down. Kael'Zor hesitated, his clawed fingers drumming against the table. Your people laugh in the face of despair. You fight as though defeat is not an outcome, even when logic dictates otherwise. It is not reckless optimism, it is defiance, a refusal to surrender to the inevitable. And yet, it is not born of arrogance. It is something deeper. Donald chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. You're overthinking it, Kael. We're just too stubborn to quit. No, Kael'Zor said firmly. It is more than stubbornness. It is a connection, a brotherhood, a bond that transcends species or differences. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. I would not be alive without you, Donalds. None of us would. Yet you risked your life without hesitation. Time and again. Donald shrugged, his grin softening. That's what we do. You'd do the same for me, wouldn't you? Kael'Zor paused, the question hanging in the air. Slowly he nodded. Yes, I would. Donald's raised his coffee in mock toast. There you go. Brotherhood. Now you're starting to sound like one of us. The mess hall door slid open, and Commander Elena Darnell strode in, her presence commanding even in the relaxed setting. She carried a datapad under one arm, and paused briefly when she saw them. Corporal Donalds, Kael'Zor, she said, her tone crisp but not unkind. Mind if I join you? Sure thing, Commander, Donald said, gesturing to the empty seat. We were just talking about how great I am. Darnell arched an eyebrow as she Saturday, no doubt. But that's not why I'm here. She placed a datapad on the table, sliding it toward them. The debriefs from Thalzer for an Astonished have made their way to command. Your actions are being reviewed for commendations. Kael'Zor blinked, his mandibles clicking in surprise. Commendations? For doing what was necessary. For doing what no one else could, Darnell corrected. The odds were impossible, and yet you succeeded. Command wants to make an example of that. Donald smirked. Great. Does that mean we get better coffee? Darnell ignored him, her focus on Kael'Zor. There's more. Your name has come up in discussions about interspecies leadership programs. They're impressed by your adaptability and your ability to work alongside humans. Kael'Zor's claws tapped the edge of his cup. I am honored, Commander, but I am not certain I deserve such recognition. I merely followed where others led. You did more than that, Darnell said, her gaze steady. You've seen the best of humanity in action. Now you have the chance to carry that forward. To bridge the gap between our species. Kael'Zor fell silent, his thoughts churning. He thought of Sergeant Mason's unwavering courage, of Donald's irrepressible humor, and of the countless sacrifices made by those who had fought beside him. The weight of their legacy pressed upon him, a heavy yet comforting burden. I will consider it, he said finally. Darnell nodded, rising from her seat. Take your time, but don't take too long. The galaxy needs more leaders like you. She turned and walked away, leaving them alone once more. Donalds watched her go, then leaned back with a whistle. Leadership programs, huh? Look at you, Kael, climbing the ranks. Just don't forget us grunts when you're giving fancy speeches at the Capitol. Kael'Zor's mandibles curved in what could almost be called a smile. I doubt I will ever master your talent for speechcraft, Donalds. Talent, he says. Donalds replied with a laugh. More like a gift. Kael'Zor looked out the viewport. where the endless void of space stretched before them. The stars glimmered like distant promises, each one a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the challenges it held. He thought of the battles they had fought, the lives they had saved, and the lessons he had learned. Humans were a paradox, fragile yet unbreakable, chaotic yet fiercely united. They defied every expectation, their flaws and strengths intertwined in a way that was both maddening and awe-inspiring. For the first time, Kael'Zor understood why so many species feared them. It wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their spirit, their refusal to accept defeat, their capacity to find humor in despair, and their unshakable belief in one another. "I believe," Kael'Zor said slowly, "that the galaxy could learn much from your kind." Donald's raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous thought, my friend. You sure the galaxy's ready for us?" Kael'Zor's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. "Perhaps not, but it will be, because I will ensure it." Donald's grinned, raising his coffee in salute. "Now that sounds like a speech. You're learning, Kael." Kael'Zor allowed himself a rare chuckle, a deep, resonant sound that echoed in the quiet mess hall. For the first time in his life, he felt not just a sense of duty, but a sense of purpose, a belief that together they could forge a future worth fighting for. The stars outside seemed closer now, their light a reminder of the vast potential that lay ahead. And as Kael'Zor sat beside Donald's, he knew one thing for certain. The legacy of humanity's courage, humor, and brotherhood would endure, and he would be the one to carry it forward.